Richard Garfield has even come out and said this was his biggest fear for Magic, that the collectability becomes the forefront of the game and the game itself becomes secondary.
Distraction makers.
So there was apparently a huge Secret Lair debacle where Magic put up the Marvel Secret Lair, and it was no longer print to demand. It was a limited quantity, and you had to get in a queue, and if you didn't get it, you don't get to buy it.
Right.
Which we'll get into like where some of those tactics come from and why that might be the case, but left a pretty bad taste in a lot of people's mouths in terms of feeling excluded, let's say. Also,
ironic, because the cards were of X-Men.
There was also like a special version of Arcane Signet or something.
Okay.
There was a card, I think it was Arcane Signet. There was a special version of it that apparently was only available in limited quantities, and they didn't even have enough for as many of the X-Men cards that they were printing to go to people. Right. So there were people that got the X-Men cards but didn't get the extra special little... Yeah, the whole situation's kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
But I've heard a lot of speculation as to like some of it carrying water for Wizards saying, oh, well, they had to do it this way because of print runs, or like to make sure people could like get the cards in a certain amount of time and all this stuff. And it's just not how this works.
But then why would they do it?
Money.
Oh.
Right. Yeah. Being from the sort of collector art community, before I was a full-time game designer, I was working on my own independent art, and I would go to conventions and sell art and limited edition print runs, things like that. And you do that kind of a thing to drive demand, and it seems pretty obvious. But there's different ways that you can approach that problem, right? Where a lot of artists I know will do timed edition instead of limited edition, where they'll basically say, okay, well, for 48 hours, anybody that wants to order these can order them, and then after that amount of time...
I did that.
Oh, you did? Yeah. Right. Sure. You've done that too. But it is basically, I think, a more fair way for people to get the product, whatever it is. And the sort of limited edition, limited amount of time philosophy comes from collector culture, right? There's sneaker culture, there's art culture with artists like Shepard Fairey, the Obey brand or Supreme.
Right.
Like, this is very like...
It's the idea of you make it limited. It's artificial scarcity. Right?
Artificial scarcity.
It's making it scarce so that people will see, oh, I missed it. I just missed it. I got to get it next time. Or then it goes on the secondary market and they spend lots and lots of money, which I don't totally understand, because it's not like the brand itself profits off the secondary market necessarily, but it does profit off of the narrative tied to the secondary market. Yeah,
and that's always been a weird thing for Wizards of the Coast to navigate, right? Because they don't necessarily want to acknowledge that the secondary market exists, because if they do, then booster packs might be considered gambling. And so there's always been weird territory for them. Yeah. But with these particular X-Men cards, I think that Wizards' goal, and Chris Cox came out and basically said, hey, these will sell out. Like there was an investor meeting or some shit, and he basically was guaranteeing that these need to sell out. Yeah. And there's some perverse incentives here, right? Because he's basically saying, like, this looks good for future IP crossovers too, where they're like, oh, look at the buzz that was driven because of this. And a little behind the scenes look at some of this stuff. Sometimes stuff sells out that didn't actually sell out, which I'm sure most people realize.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it can just sell and you say, oh, yeah, it's all gone.
Sold out.
More than likely it did not, and there's still plenty of copies of it.
Right. But you're just going to like close the door on it and say that it sold out to drive buzz.
Right. In particular, too, you can just come back. Like, let's say there's a lot of player backlash, right? And there's a lot of players that are like, oh, well, I was in queue and I got out of queue, or whatever. I didn't get my cards. Wizards can be like, we're sorry, we'll sell them to you again.
Right. Yeah.
And like the same thing could happen. Like, you know, so they're in control of being able to do that whenever they want.
Yeah. And like, so that's kind of the situation that unfolded. Other content creators in the Magic community have weighed in on the various levels of predatory that this is and things. But I think for us, the more important thing to look at here is, what do we think Secret Lair could be that would be good for the game, because what's going on now in terms of like exclusive cards that are limited edition, I think is particularly pernicious in terms of you're going to have some people that get these and you're going to have other people that don't. And I also think that it drives people towards proxying the cards. If you can't get them, then what else are you going to do?
Before we get into why Secret Lair is our new favorite thing in Magic the Gathering, please, if you like our videos, give us a little like and a comment down below. Also, you can find a link to our Discord in the description of this video.
Back to the video.
Yeah, that's personally the thing that I care more about is how does this actually impact the overall game itself and not just the collector culture. It's interesting because we're seeing some games start to explore this a little bit more with this sort of like owning a unique card that has a limited quantity. Altered just did this.
Yeah.
So Altered has their actual cards are called uniques, which they use algorithmically generated cards. You've seen it used in things like Keyforge or Soulforge Fusion, stuff like that.
And these could be like a fully unique, like one of one card that has special stats.
They're using like a card as a base and then augmenting
it. They're altering it, if you will.
Yeah, I get it. I fucking get it. I think it's funny because it's very divisive when it comes to that game even, where a lot of people are like, well, you could just have this insanely good unique card, or you could get an insanely bad unique card. So it's not even that like some of them have high value or low value. But you are essentially just, again, it's like it's printing artificial scarcity in a way. I feel like that's at least a little bit more forgivable because I think that's so closely tied to game design and how you play the game, and less so on the collector's side of things, where it's like obviously a collector would probably want like this really great one of one unique card, of course, but the fact that it actually also changes how you play the game, I think is such a cool, unique thing to feel. It feels like what I thought Yu-Gi-Oh was going to feel like, opening a pack of Yu-Gi-Oh cards back in the day. It's like I'm going to open a card and be like, no one has ever seen this card
No one else
before.
has this. I'm incredible.
And that's such a cool feeling that it's almost forgivable that like it could be seedy with its profits.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because I think the games that are trying to do these kinds of things are almost decidedly more casual. I don't feel, I mean, Altered may or may not have a competitive scene, but I think that if they do, it will probably end up doing, I think they have a retirement system the way that Keyforge does too, where like if you open a really powerful Keyforge deck, because all the Keyforge decks are algorithmically generated in the same way, where if you open one that's really powerful and you're playing it in tournaments, eventually it you can win so too many times and they retire it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have that, but at the very least you can only have 2 uniques per deck, right? So even if like you have an incredibly powerful unique, it's just one of the 2 that you can have in your deck in general.
Well, and the other thing that Altered has is their sort of digital distribution thing with the QR codes on the cards, where like you can own the card but you can get more copies of it. So I'm wondering if that's also a way to kind of alleviate some of that, because you're effectively able to print off and give someone else a proxy of the card, right? Like they just don't own the actual digital rights. I feel like Altered was developed with like NFTs in mind, and then people were like, fuck NFTs, I hate all this shit, and they were like, whoa, like, okay, we're not gonna do that.
Halfway
like,
through development,
they were like,
no.
Pull the plug on it, let's go. Yeah.
Keep the QR codes,
right.
but don't use that word.
It feels very digital ownership,
Sure.
Not speaking of more predatory things, but yeah, but I think for Secret Lair, what might be interesting is an evolution of the TCG in general, is that the ability for you to sell, and we're seeing this with living card games where like you know exactly what you're buying and you buy it and you have it. And it's pretty clear to me that we're starting to enter this space, right, where that is kind of the market demand of customers, right? Where I don't know if it's the majority. It feels like it's the majority, but I don't have data on it, so I'm not sure. Where most players are wanting to buy the cards that they want, and they're doing it through like third-party retailers, right? So they're like Card Kingdom or, TCG Player, that kind of stuff. But they're not buying directly from Wizards of the Coast, but they're buying from these other retailers. And the thing that's so weird about this distribution model is like there is not another distribution model like this, like in the world, where let's say you're like a grocery store and you order like apples, right? And then what ends up coming to you is like 15 bananas and 2 apples. And you're like, cool, well, we had to order the bananas to get the apples, right? And customers want the apples, but what are we going to do with all those bananas?
Or sometimes you don't even get apples.
Or sometimes you don't even get the apples, right? This is, and so what's happening is like these third-party retailers are buying enough product to fulfill demand from customers and sort of alleviate that randomization burden from the customers, and then they're able to sort of capitalize on the secondary market that way. And what it's doing is it's creating these sort, like, now that we've got these sort of super third-party sellers, a lot of smaller players in the space can't really operate that way anymore, because they can't buy enough product to hedge against the variance of the way that the cards are distributed.
Sure, or they have to usually go through like TCG Player or Card Kingdom or wherever in order to sell their things.
Right, or they just sell like the ones that they open on those marketplaces. Right. Yeah. And so, like, we're in this, like, I think we're getting into this, like, such weird space with this stuff. And Secret Lair is kind of, like, dipping its toe into, okay, well, we're going to sell you know exactly what cards you're going to get. And then, like, it's almost selling singles, right? And I think that, like, a more fair business model of that, where it's sort of print to demand, or, like, there's certain cards that are always available to be purchased this way. And, like, yeah, you're buying a chunk of cards, but you're, like, it's not this like artificial scarcity, it's only available right now, it'll never be available again kind of situation. You might end up doing some of that with sort of like special edition releases, but this idea that like you can't get these cards again, this is the only time, it feels like it's just creating an environment where scalpers can come in, swoop up the cards, and then sell them for massive profits on the secondary market.
To me, I think it's funny because this seems like such just a terrible move. Like more like obviously collectors very interested, right? Using the IP crossover as a way of getting people interested, also very, very effective. The fact that these cards are wholly unique cards is insane to me. And in fact, Yu-Gi-Oh! Did this back in the day, sort of, where instead it was tying unique cards to other products. And so if you bought like the PlayStation games of Yu-Gi-Oh!, it would come with 3 unique cards.
Yeah, Pokemon did this too a little bit, I think.
Yes. I don't think Pokemon had any that were like...
I remember there was like a Mew card.
So there's a Mew that you could get if you went to the movie.
When you see the movie,
but I don't think it was like a tournament, like
I'm sure
high
it was
staple.
Just a special edition.
It just looked cool. But but Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of, they went the other route. They printed a card called Harpy's Feather Duster that destroyed all your opponent's spells and trap cards.
That sounds pretty good.
And it was very good. And it was too good. And so everybody basically was like, oh, well, we have to buy the PlayStation game in order to go and get this. I think it was PlayStation or Game Boy or something. But basically everyone had to go and buy that game in order to get 3 copies of Harpy's Feather Duster to put into their deck.
Here's the question, though.
Uh-huh.
How many copies of that game did they sell?
Probably a lot of copies of that game. I think there's a reason that a lot of people end up looking back on old Yu-Gi-Oh! Console games very fondly, as opposed to looking at other trading card game, video game adaptations that with not as much interest.
I think the biggest risk, right? So sales are kind of like money is a communication tool in a way, right? Where your player base is telling you, hey, we want this thing. We're buying it. We like it. We want it. But the problem is when you're crossing the streams with collector purchasing.
Are players invested or are collectors invested? And we're seeing this in Kickstarter in droves right now.
Oh, yeah.
Every new Kickstarter trading card game, I mean, looking at Altered, I'm not saying that a lot of people weren't interested in Altered. Yeah. They did a lot right to get the success that they saw in their Kickstarter. But I assure you, there are so many people that went to that game because they're trying to capitalize on the newest craze in collecting in trading card games.
And really, like, this has become such a weird boom, right? Like the secondary market of TCGs. I mean, part of this is brought on, I don't know if it was like brought on by cryptocurrency, but I think the culture crosses over a lot.
Sure.
Where there's sort of all these like speculative assets, because I don't know, we don't need to necessarily get into the sort of monetary theory of what's going on there, at least my hypothesis of it. But I feel like this stuff is a placeholder because people aren't feeling like they can invest in other areas that maybe make more sense. So they're looking for what they can invest in, right?
Well, it's a volatile market, right? So
yeah.
it's hot, so they're going to buy it, resell it, and then they're going to look for the next thing, right?
And there's obviously some amount of people that are making money there. But the issue, though, is the damage it's doing to the signal that's being sent to the company of what's actually what the players want, the people that are sticking around and the people that will be playing this game, or maybe they won't when the bottom falls out of this. Right?
And this is, I mean, just anecdotally, I went to the game store just today to pick up this box of Foundations, and I was going to pick up a starter collection set. Now, I'm not a new player, but the starter collection, I wanted to take a look at it. It's relevant to what we talk about here. Yeah. I'm excited about it. And I thought it'd be cool, and I liked it as an opportunity to go and show other friends of mine that don't play Magic as a nice jumping-off point for playing Magic, and they were sold out. Yeah. I hope that those starter collections went to other people with similar interests that I had, or people that were beginners and wanted to get into the game. But I have a strong feeling like $60, 350 cards in a starter collection set did not go to brand new players.
I really do think this risk of, I think this might even be like why, look, I'm sure there's people that love Universes Beyond. It's clearly bringing in new players. It's doing stuff. And I don't want to, like, if people like it, that's great. But I do worry about the sort of collector aspect, adding a lot of noise to the sort of signal that is where customers buying something. And players being happy with it, enfranchised players that will be here when Magic has a downturn of some variety. But we'll see. I mean, like, I don't know. It's tough to know. What I do know is that leaning into the collector culture and abusing your customers by creating a predatory limited edition product that people have to sit in queues for is not great.
To me, tying it mostly with gameplay is kind of the deal breaker for me.
Yeah.
Is that if the fact is that you cannot play with this toy that you have, and it's only probably going to increase in price over time because of its unique nature, that doesn't feel like a player first decision, right?
No.
That feels very much like, oh yeah, these are going to sell. Like,
yeah. Well, and even like Richard Garfield has even come out and said,
right,
this was his biggest fear for Magic, and it was that the collectability becomes the forefront of the game, and the game itself becomes secondary.
Sorry, Richie.
Yeah.